Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
The Minnesota Vikings just dropped a bomb that's sending shockwaves through the entire organization. And if you're a diehard purple and gold fanatic, you might want to sit down for this one. We're talking about devastating injury news that nobody saw coming, a franchise cornerstone heading for surgery, and a young defensive monster who's about to get unleashed in ways that could completely reshape the trajectory of this team's future. This is the kind of storyline that separates the pretenders from the contenders, the kind of gut punch moment that tests the mettle of an entire franchise. But here's the twist that nobody's talking about yet. This catastrophe might actually be the best thing that could happen to the Vikings' long-term championship aspirations. Yeah, you heard that right. Sometimes disaster breeds opportunity, and what we're witnessing right now in Minneapolis could be the genesis of something truly special. Buckle up, because this story has more layers than a Vikings defensive scheme, and by the time we're done unpacking all of it, you're going to see this team in a completely different light. Let's rip the Band-Aid off and get straight to the heart-wrenching news that has Vikings Nation collectively holding its breath. Jonathan Greenard, the defensive captain and foundational piece that this entire defense was built around, is officially done for the remainder of the season. That shoulder injury that's been nagging him all year, the one that had him on pitch counts and questionable designations week after week, finally caught up with him in the most brutal way possible during Sunday night's showdown against the Dallas Cowboys. We all saw it happen in real time. The moment Greenard clutched that shoulder and made the long, lonely walk to the locker room, every single Vikings fan watching knew something was terribly wrong. You could feel it through the television screen. That wasn't a minor tweak or a temporary setback. That was a franchise player potentially watching his season evaporate before his eyes, and unfortunately, our worst fears were confirmed. Head coach Kevin O'Connell didn't mince words when addressing the media about Greenard's situation, and you could hear the weight of discipline of coming back stronger and healthier for the upcoming season. But O'Connell's comments weren't just about the physical loss of a talented pass rusher. He went out of his way to emphasize something that goes beyond stats and sack numbers. He talked about Greenard's leadership, his commitment to being a foundational player, and the massive impact he's had both on the field and in the locker room, especially over these last two tumultuous weeks when the Vikings season has been teetering on the edge of complete collapse. The timing of this injury couldn't be worse, or depending on how you look at it, couldn't be more perfectly aligned with where the Vikings find themselves as a franchise. With playoff contention officially out of reach, the organization made the prudent decision to shut Greenard down rather than risk further damage to a player they're counting on as a cornerstone of their defensive future. It's the smart play, the responsible play, but that doesn't make it any less painful for a fan base that's watched this season spiral into chaos after showing so much promise. When you dig into Greenard's numbers this season, they tell the story of a player fighting through adversity. 19 solo tackles, 3 sacks, and a forced fumble might not jump off the stat sheet as elite production, but context matters here. This is a guy who's been playing hurt, who's been dealing with that shoulder issue on and off throughout the entire campaign, who's been put in defensive situations where the Vikings were playing prevent schemes rather than unleashing their full aggressive arsenal because they were protecting leads or trying to manage game situations. The absence of Jonathan Greenard is something this defense has felt acutely whenever he's been off the field this season. There's an undeniable presence he brings, a veteran, savvy, and relentless motor that elevates everyone around him. Offensive coordinators have to account for him. Quarterbacks have to know where he is at all times. His ability to set the edge, collapse the pocket, and make game-changing plays in critical moments is something you simply cannot replace with a one-for-one substitution. But here's where the narrative takes a fascinating turn, where the clouds start to part and reveal a silver lining that could end up being one of the most significant developments of the Vikings' entire season. Because while losing Greenard is absolutely devastating in the short term, it creates an opportunity for a young defensive phenom who's been chomping at the bit for more playing time, who's shown flashes of absolute brilliance, and who might just be ready to announce himself as the next dominant force on this Vikings defense. Enter Dallas Turner, the second-year edge rusher out of Alabama, who's been steadily building momentum throughout this season, and looks poised to absolutely explode with the increased workload coming his way. This kid is special, folks. We're not talking about a serviceable backup stepping into a larger role. We're talking about a legitimate blue chip talent who was always destined for stardom, who just needed the opportunity to showcase what he can do on a consistent basis. Turner's production this season has been impressive, even in a limited role. 23 solo tackles, 5.5 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles, with more than half of that production coming in just the last couple of games. When he's been on the field, he's been a disruptive force, a violent, explosive athlete who plays with the kind of reckless abandon that offensive linemen have nightmares about. His sack numbers actually lead the team alongside Eric Wilson, which is remarkable considering he hasn't been a full-time starter. What makes Turner so intriguing is that we've only seen glimpses of what he's capable of. Last year gave us a preview of his potential, and this year, whenever injuries to Greenard created opportunities for increased snaps, Turner has consistently answered the bell. Head coach Kevin O'Connell has been vocal about wanting to get Turner more opportunities, but the depth chart was simply too stacked early in the season. You had Greenard playing at a high level when healthy. You had Andrew Van Ginkel having a career year, and the rotation was functioning well enough that there wasn't a pressing need to force feed snaps to the young guy. But now the situation has changed dramatically. Now Turner is going to get the chance to be the featured player, to take on the full responsibility of being a primary pass rusher, and all with improving technique. The defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, has shown an incredible ability to maximize the talent of his players, to put them in positions to succeed, and to scheme up creative ways to generate pressure and create turnovers. What he's done with players like Jalen Redmond and Levi Drake Rodriguez, getting career best production out of guys who might have been afterthoughts on other rosters, speaks to his ability to develop talent and deploy it effectively. Now he gets to work with Turner as a featured piece, and that's when things could get really interesting. Imagine Flores unleashing Turner in his full arsenal of blitzes and stunts, using his speed and explosiveness to create havoc in opposing backfields. The potential for Turner to not just fill Greenard's shoes, but potentially exceed expectations is very real. And that's what makes this storyline so compelling despite the unfortunate circumstances that created it. The Vikings' defensive line as a whole has been dealing with the injury bug, which has created opportunities for younger players to step up and prove themselves. Javon Hargrave's status is currently day-to-day, and if he's unable to go, that opens even more snaps for players like Jalen Redmond and Levi Drake Rodriguez. The silver lining in all of this roster chaos is that the Vikings are getting extended looks at their young talent, getting real game reps for players who could factor significantly into the team's future. This isn't garbage time production or meaningless snaps and blowouts. These are legitimate NFL game situations where young players are being asked to perform at a high level against quality competition. The evaluation process is invaluable, and the experience these guys are gaining right now will pay dividends when the Vikings are back in playoff contention. Speaking of playoff contention, let's address the elephant in the room. The Vikings season has been an unmitigated disaster from a win-loss perspective. After showing so much promise early in the campaign, after building legitimate hope that this could be a competitive team in a brutal NFC North division, everything fell apart in spectacular fashion, early outmatched. Fans were justified in their frustration, in their anger at watching what appeared to be a complete collapse. But something interesting happened in that Sunday night game against the Dallas Cowboys. Something clicked. The Vikings went into Jerry World, that cathedral of football excess where Jerry Jones holds court like a modern-day emperor, and they absolutely demolished a Cowboys team that still harbored legitimate playoff aspirations. Now, this wasn't a lucky win or a game where everything bounced the Vikings' way. This was a dominant performance, a statement game that showed this team still has pride, still has fight, and isn't going to roll over just because the playoffs are out of reach. The schadenfreude of ruining the Cowboys' playoff hopes cannot be overstated. There's something deeply satisfying about playing spoiler, about crushing the dreams of a fan base that had convinced themselves they were going to sneak into the postseason despite all evidence to the contrary. Cowboys fans on social media were in absolute meltdown mode, and Vikings fans were there for every delicious moment of it. Jerry Jones's misery is a gift that keeps on giving, and watching his team get dominated in prime time on Sunday Night Football, broadcast to millions of viewers around the world, was the kind of cathartic experience that Vikings fans desperately needed after weeks of pain and suffering. Sometimes you have to take your victories where you can find them. And if making Cowboys fans cry is all this season has to offer, well, that's still pretty damn satisfying. But the victory over Dallas represented something more significant than just a spoiler win. It potentially marked a turning point for the offense, and specifically for rookie quarterback J.J. McCarthy, who has been on an absolute roller coaster ride this season. McCarthy's journey has been one of the most compelling storylines in all of football this year. The hype coming out of college was enormous. The expectations were sky high. He was supposed to be the savior, the franchise quarterback who would lead the Vikings into a new era of prosperity. Then reality hit hard. McCarthy struggled mightily early in the season, throwing interceptions at an alarming rate, making rookie mistakes that had fans and media members questioning whether the Vikings had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The memes were relentless, brutal, and seemingly everywhere. Social media became a torture chamber for McCarthy supporters, with every bad throw turned into viral content mocking the young quarterback. Then came the concussion that knocked McCarthy out of action for several weeks. When a player suffers a head injury, especially a quarterback, there's always concern about how they'll respond when they return. Will they be tentative? Will they have lost confidence? Will the injury have lasting effects on their play? McCarthy's return against the Washington Commanders provided some answers, and they were encouraging ones. Against an admittedly terrible Commanders defense, McCarthy looked composed, decisive, and efficient. He made the throws he needed to make, avoided the catastrophic mistakes that had plagued his early season performances, and generally looked like a quarterback who had turned a corner. But skeptics were quick to point out that the Commanders are historically bad this year, that beating up on a dysfunctional organization proves nothing about McCarthy's actual development. The Cowboys game provided a more substantial data point. Dallas, despite their own struggles and disappointing season, still fields a defense with legitimate NFL talent. This wasn't a scrimmage against a junior varsity squad. This was a real test, and McCarthy passed with flying colors. He didn't just manage the game or avoid losing it. He actively helped win it, making plays with his arm and his legs, showing the kind of dual threat ability that made him such an attractive prospect in the first place. The confidence in his play was palpable. The decision-making was dramatically improved, and most importantly, the memes stopped. Within 24 hours of that performance, the narrative around J.J. McCarthy completely flipped. The same social media accounts that had been mercilessly mocking him were suddenly posting highlight reels and praising his development. That's how quickly things can change in the NFL, how one or two performances can completely alter the trajectory of a player's reputation. Now McCarthy faces another test against the New York Giants, another struggling team with a porous defense that the Vikings should absolutely feast upon. Jackson Dart and the Giants have been a disaster this season, and if McCarthy can stack another strong performance on top of his recent success, the momentum heading into the offseason becomes incredibly positive. Yes, the skeptics will continue to point out that these wins are coming against inferior competition, that McCarthy hasn't proven he can perform against elite defenses or in high-pressure playoff situations. Those criticisms are valid and fair, but what matters right now is building confidence, establishing rhythm, creating positive momentum, and giving the coaching staff reason to believe that McCarthy is developing into the quarterback they believed he could be when they drafted him. 3 consecutive strong performances would represent tangible progress, the kind of trajectory that organizations can build around and invest in for the long term. The Vikings find themselves in a fascinating position heading into the final 3 games of the season. They have nothing to lose and everything to gain in terms of player development and evaluation. They're also in a unique position to play absolute spoiler for the rest of the NFC North Division. The schedule includes matchups against both the Green Bay Packers and the Detroit Lions, division rivals who are still fighting for playoff positioning and seeding. The Packers season has essentially imploded, with Micah Parsons suffering a torn ACL that will keep him out for the remainder of this year, and likely a significant portion of next season. That's a devastating blow to Green Bay's championship aspirations, and the Vikings have the opportunity to twist the knife even deeper by handing them another loss. Similarly, the Lions, despite their success this season, still have vulnerabilities that a motivated Vikings team could exploit. Playing spoiler might not make up for missing the playoffs, but there's something deeply satisfying about determining the fate of your rivals, about making their paths to championship glory that much more difficult. This brings us to one of the most intriguing and controversial topics swirling around the Vikings organization right now, the trade rumors involving Joe Burrow. Multiple reports have suggested that if Minnesota were to make a serious push to acquire the Cincinnati Bengals quarterback, the price would be astronomical. We're talking about a package that would include J.J. McCarthy, Jonathan Greenard, and multiple high draft picks. It's the kind of blockbuster trade that would send shockwaves through the entire league, that would represent an all-in bet on winning immediately with a proven elite quarterback, rather than continuing to develop a young signal caller with question marks. The debate among Vikings fans about whether such a trade would be worth it is passionate and divisive. On one hand, Joe Burrow is a legitimate superstar, a quarterback who has proven he can win at the highest level, who elevates everyone around him, and who would instantly make the Vikings a legitimate Super Bowl contender. On the other hand, giving up McCarthy, Greenard, and premium draft capital would gut the roster's young core and mortgage significant portions of the future for what might only be a small championship window. If McCarthy continues to play the way he has in recent games, if he stacks wins and shows genuine development, that trade becomes much harder to justify. Why give up a quarterback on a rookie contract who might be developing into a legitimate franchise player, along with a defensive captain and multiple draft picks, for an older quarterback with a much larger contract and more wear on his body? The calculus changes dramatically if McCarthy proves he can be the guy. That's what makes these final 3 games so important beyond just playing spoiler and evaluating young talent. McCarthy is quite literally playing for his future with the organization. Every throw, every decision, every performance is being scrutinized through the lens of whether the Vikings should stick with him or make a move for someone like Burrow. The pressure is immense, but if the recent performances are any indication, McCarthy might be thriving under that pressure rather than wilting. The defensive side of the equation in a potential Burrow trade also becomes more complicated if Dallas Turner continues his ascent. If Turner proves over these final 3 games that he can be an elite pass rusher, that he can anchor one side of the defensive line and generate consistent pressure without needing Greenard on the field, then trading Greenard becomes more palatable. The Vikings are already projected to be $24 million over the salary cap next season, a deficit that will require some painful decisions and roster moves. Greenard's contract carries a $22 million cap hit, and if Dallas Turner shows he's ready to be the guy, that money could be reallocated elsewhere or used to dig out of the cap hell the Vikings find themselves in. It's cold business, but that's the nature of the modern NFL, where salary cap management is just as important as talent evaluation and game planning. The opportunity for Turner over these final 3 games is massive. If he can continue his recent production, if he can record multiple sacks in each of the remaining contests, if he can show that he's not just a situational pass rusher, but someone who can hold up against the run and play 3 downs consistently, his stock will skyrocket. The coaching staff already believes in his potential. They've seen what he can do in practice and in limited game action. Now they get to see what he looks like as the featured player, as the guy that opposing offenses have to game plan around. That's a completely different level of responsibility and scrutiny. Some players wilt under that spotlight, unable to handle the increased attention and expectations. Others thrive, using the opportunity to showcase everything they've been working on and announce themselves as legitimate stars. All indications suggest Turner falls into the latter category, that he's been waiting for this moment and is going to make the absolute most of it. The Giants game on Sunday represents the perfect opportunity for both Turner and McCarthy to continue building their cases. Jackson Dart has been turnover-prone all season, the kind of quarterback who makes mistakes when pressured and forced into uncomfortable situations. If Turner and the Vikings defense can harass Dart all afternoon, force him into bad decisions, and generate turnovers, it will be exactly the kind of performance that validates the coaching staff's belief in the young pass rusher. Simultaneously, McCarthy gets another chance to build on his recent success against a defense that has struggled to stop anyone. The Giants have been hemorrhaging yards and points, and if McCarthy can orchestrate another efficient, mistake-free performance with multiple touchdown passes, the narrative around him continues to shift in a positive direction. These are the kind of layup opportunities that young players need to establish confidence and rhythm before facing tougher challenges. Looking at the broader roster construction and future planning, the Vikings have some fascinating decisions to make this offseason. The salary cap situation is going to force some tough choices. Players are going to be cut or traded that fans have emotional attachments to. Draft picks will need to be used wisely to inject young, cheap talent into the roster to offset the departures of more expensive veterans. The quarterback situation needs to be definitively resolved one way or another. The offensive line, which has been a persistent problem area, requires significant investment. The secondary needs upgrades. There's a laundry list of issues that need addressing, and not all of them can be fixed in a single offseason, but having answers about players like Turner and McCarthy makes those decisions easier. If you know Turner is the future at edge rusher, you can feel comfortable moving on from Greenard if necessary. If you know McCarthy is developing into a franchise quarterback, you don't need to mortgage the future to acquire someone else. The defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, deserves enormous credit for the work he's done maximizing the talent on this roster despite the injuries and adversity. Players like Jalen Redmond and Levi Drake Rodriguez have become significant contributors under his tutelage. Guys who might not have even made other rosters are now getting meaningful snaps and producing. Eric Wilson has had a career resurgence. Andrew Van Ginkel continues to play at a high level. The scheme that Flores runs is complex and demanding, but when players buy in and execute, it creates havoc for opposing offenses. The aggressive nature of his defenses, the willingness to bring pressure from multiple angles, the creativity in disguising coverages, all of it creates an environment where talented players can thrive. Turner stepping into a larger role within this scheme should be must-watch television for Vikings fans. The combination of his physical tools and Flores' creative mind could produce some spectacular moments. The 3-game finishing stretch provides a clear roadmap for evaluation and development. The Giants game should be a win where young players can build confidence. The Packers game represents a chance for revenge and spoiler duties against a hated division rival that's reeling from devastating injuries. The Lions game could be a statement contest where the Vikings show they're not as far away from contention as their record suggests, that with a few key additions and continued development, they'll be right back in the playoff hunt next season. None of these games matter in terms of postseason positioning for Minnesota, but they matter enormously for organizational momentum, player development, and establishing the foundation for future success. A strong finish could be the difference between an offseason of despair and an offseason of cautious optimism. The Jonathan Greenard injury is legitimately heartbreaking for a player who embodies everything you want in a team leader and defensive captain. He's fought through pain all season, put the team first, and shown the kind of character that organizations build around. The fact that his season ends this way, shut down for surgery to repair damage that he'd been gutting through for months, is a cruel reminder of how unforgiving football can be. But his leadership doesn't end just because he's not on the field. O'Connell specifically mentioned how important Greenard's presence remains in the locker room, how his commitment and foundational mentality continue to impact the team even when he can't suit up on Sundays. That's the mark of a true leader, someone whose influence transcends their physical contributions. Greenard will be there, supporting Turner, mentoring him, helping him navigate the challenges of being a featured player. That relationship and knowledge transfer could prove invaluable for Turner's development. The surgery and rehabilitation process for Greenard will be extensive, but the expectation is that he'll return fully healthy for the start of next season. This isn't a career-threatening injury. It's a necessary procedure to repair damage and ensure he can return to his previous form. The Vikings are making the smart, long-term decision by shutting him down now, rather than risking further damage that could have more severe consequences. Sometimes in professional sports, you have to make the difficult decision that prioritizes a player's long-term health and career over short-term competitive needs. With the playoffs out of reach, there was no justification for continuing to run Greenard out there at less than 100%, risking additional damage for meaningless games. The organization did right by their captain, and that matters both for Greenard personally and as a message to the rest of the locker room about how the Vikings treat their players. As we head into this final stretch of the season, the Vikings find themselves in a peculiar purgatory where winning doesn't improve their playoff chances, but losing would only deepen the misery of an already disappointing campaign. The choice to compete hard, to play spoiler, to give young players opportunities to prove themselves represents the right approach. There's dignity in fighting through adversity, in refusing to quit even when the season is lost. The character that a team shows in these circumstances often carries over into the following season. Teams that quit and mail it in during meaningless December games often struggle to recapture that competitive spirit when it matters again.